if you're building a consumer brand and you can find a cultural disconnect, something where how the consumer is being currently served is completely at odds with where the culture is going, you have an opportunity to do something and tell a story that is magical and game changing.
And welcome to the Startup Innovators podcast, where we look at some of the hottest companies that are on the planet. And today I'm pretty excited. I've got Alastair Dorward on the pod today. First of all, hello, Alistair. How you doing?
Great, Tim. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, great. So a lot of times in these podcasts, we have venture-backed companies or private equity. They're kind of institutionally backed companies. They tend to range more on the tech sector because when people think of like venture capital, they're thinking of like AI and all these sexy tech companies. But venture capital and private equity goes very, very deep into traditional industries as well. And I've always loved the space around consumer brands and consumer goods packaging. It's the kind of thing that we experience a lot every day, and both consciously and subconsciously, as we're eating, buying, putting things on, right, showering with things. And it's a huge marketplace. And so I thought it would be great to get someone who has raised venture capital, has invested in high growth companies that were outside of tech that do impact people every day. And I go back when we first met, you had become CEO of Method Products, crazy period of time where I felt like everywhere I went, someone said, "Hey, did you see the show Lost that was on last night? And by the way, have you heard of Method Products?" It seemed like everybody I touched in my circle and their wives, they were talking about those two things. So we're going to touch base on that. I'm really excited about it. And so thank you for coming on. I'd like to do a quick intro, which I always do, just so people who are not familiar with you or even Method potentially would know. So Alistair is a brand builder behind some of the most iconic eco-friendly companies in consumer goods. He was the founding CEO of Method, as we just mentioned, which was a design-first cleaning brand that turned kind of boring grocery store items that we didn't think too much about into kind of hip, cool, kind of aisle showstoppers, which became part of really $100 million plus dollar movement. And Method had won incredible awards that range from Time to Fast Company and Red Dot for the innovation, their packaging, and most importantly, their health and environmental impact. And he recently just stepped down after doing an incredible turnaround and transition from Drops as their CEO, which was a plastic-free cleaning brand that again was on a mission to eliminate waste from home care. Under his leadership, Drops had exploded to a national shelf presence at big places like Wiggins and Target, while still staying 100% carbon neutral, cruelty-free. We're going to talk about cruelty-free as plastic-free, which is something that I'm trying to get all the plastics out of my body. So certainly things that we put on our dishes and on our clothing, that would certainly be something that would impact that. Drops had won the EPA's Safer Choice Partner of the Year award and was actually ranked #1 in Consumer Reports for cleaning performance and sustainability. And I noticed this theme, Alistair, kind of across your career. You've led companies that were specifically involved in bold or creative design, always sustainability, and kind of a mission or company-driven approach first. This idea of conscious consumerism, where people really care about what they're putting into their body, how those products are made, and kind of the overall environmental impact they're making on the world. And so with that, I'm excited to get going and jump into this.
You got it. I've had a habit of zigging while everyone else has been zagging, right? So I came to the Bay Area from Europe in the mid-90s, just at the start of the first dot-com boom. And people thought I was nuts, kind of doing the consumer thing while everyone else was jumping into, that first world of the first dot-com boom. But look, I'm a big believer that, consumer products has the opportunity of driving fundamental change, right, in the world, because as you pointed out, it's humdrum, it's mundane, which actually means you're using it every day. And if you're using something every day, like a detergent or a hand wash product, then changing that habit on a daily basis for something that is better for you, better for the planet, has fundamental and actually revolutionary impact because of the daily usage. So that's really some of the underpinning sort of philosophy about why consumer, because it has huge impact.
Yeah. I think timing is so much of any person or any company's success. And it just seems today, maybe it's because we live in a world where there's Instagram and YouTube and zillions of podcasts where you can basically learn about the things that you put inside your body and on your body that are very, very bad for you. I remember years ago, when I was a kid, you'd buy a product at the grocery store, tomato sauce or whatever, and there were no specifications and you had no idea what you're putting in. You were literally trusting these brand companies that as we look backwards, it was terrible stuff. I would never put that stuff in my body today. And then the laws passed and you had to start labeling things and people became more interested in what was the makeup of the things. Certainly today, for sure, people are much more aware of all these toxins that are out there, specifically in plastics, the chemicals, the additives. And there's podcasts like Andrew Huberman, for example, always talking about,
Yeah.
I could name 10 of them, right?
Yeah.
About these things that are destroying our health and destroying our body and creating metabolic syndrome. And they're in the things that we took for granted. So on that note, I would love to get your thoughts on what is a mission driven or purpose driven company? Because every company in theory has a mission and a purpose. But I think that kind of moniker, there's a sense of nobility behind it today, where it's a company that's trying to do something that tends to benefit humanity as a whole. That's the way I've always perceived mission driven companies. I wouldn't say Coca-Cola is a mission driven company, even though they may say they are, or at least a purpose driven company. But I'd love to get your thoughts because you've really been involved in brands that are trying to do something unique.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to the heart of capitalism, right? Where what is the role of the CEO? What is the role of the corporation? Which historically, by a very narrow definition, has been to maximize the profit for shareholders and pretty much at all costs. Externalities be damned. And I think what mission driven companies have in common is that, making money remains very important, but there's a broader definition of stakeholder. It's not just shareholder value. It's actually looking at some of the externalities that are impacted by the business's operations, right? And that goes to community, it goes to environment, it goes to employee welfare, and a recognition that business has a responsibility to, deliver improvement, not just the bottom line, but across all of these broader stakeholder elements. So I think that's
Yeah.
what mission driven companies have in common. And the mission can be, it's often founder driven as well, right? You've got a founder who has a particular passion for a unmet need or something that is of incredibly important to them. So often you
Mhm.
see these businesses start with a founder with a kind of a brave mission to change the world. And, sometimes it's purely about human health because maybe they've had a family member or themselves go through a health challenge and they've been dissatisfied with what the market has delivered to them so far and just bring that product to market because they think they can do it better than the previous incumbent. And what's interesting is that there is certainly in consumer products, you have all these legacy businesses. You mentioned Coca-Cola. Clearly, there's other many large global corporations that have done a really good job of delivering a lot of free cash flow and a lot of shareholder value, but not necessarily have they had the incentive to really build welfare for the consumer or the broader stakeholder. And there's a lot of incentive to for these legacy companies to stick with old formulations, old approaches to the use of sugar, the use of
Mhm.
ingredients that are super low cost, but maybe not, as we've learned from a health point of view, maybe not have the best impact on human health. And it does require a mission driven business to kind of be the insurgent to create change in the category, often dominated by these big global players. And it's kind of this wonderful David versus Goliath story. And one of the things as a Scottish immigrant to this country, one of the things I love is America loves the underdog, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Supporting the insurgent, supporting the David versus the Goliath.
Yeah.
And that's the story of these mission driven businesses. Typically, it's an underdog story. and changing the rules of the category in a way that can be kind of sometimes quite playful, but figuring out that you can't win the game by playing the rules of a Procter and Gamble or rules of a
Sure.
Coca-Cola. You got to change the playbook in order to be able to be a successful incumbent. So that's just some of the underlying themes and that's how I think about mission-driven businesses. It's about stakeholders.
The problem, though, is ultimately, unless they become the actual Coca-Cola, what tends to happen is these companies get acquired. And then you run into that issue of do they want to build a consumer conscious division or business or make a transition? Or are they going to buy this company and then Coca-Colaize it, where it's just focused on lower quality ingredients, higher margins? You see that all the time. Like you have a brand that you love, and all of a sudden it's the same brand, but you say now it's owned by so and so, and all of a sudden you go, "Oh my god, I can never have that brand again because it's owned by this company. They're going to change it. It's going to lose that value that I love so much." How do you make those decisions when these companies ultimately get acquired?
Yeah, look, I think it depends on the category, Tim, and you raise a
Yeah,
really important point about almost the moral hazard of exit, right, as a founder. Now, if you look at the beauty category, it's one historically that was dominated by the L'Oreals of this world. But over the last decade, you see all the indie brands that have emerged really change the game on behalf of clean beauty. And I'm optimistic as the beauty category is an example where I don't have the exact data to my fingertips, but the majority of consumption is at maybe 80% of consumption, certainly in the US, are now where clean beauty is kind of the table stakes, right? And
mm,
the old ways of using parabens, phthalates, some ingredients that are known to be highly undesirable as ingredients in beauty products are no
right.
longer just in the industry. So in a sense, in beauty, the challenger, the mission has been won, right? But in other categories, you're absolutely right. You've got this sense of, well, the only way you can scale the business is to raise private equity capital, VC capital. First thing they're going to look for is an exit. And you know, the exits are to the large player who is seeking relevancy and seeking to grow by acquiring some of these high growth, hot indie brands. And you got to be very thoughtful about who your partner is. Some of the acquisitions have been successful, and you see, a few examples where the target or the acquiree actually helps transform the philosophy in the acquiring company. But in other cases, it's just yeah, we won't touch the business for a couple of years. The founder leaves, and then it's just
Yeah.
the wheels come off, and the principles, the mission, the commitment to ingredients that are more conscious kind of evaporates. So it's a dilemma. And I do think that it's a bit of a market failure in itself, in that, as the founder approaches that potential exit, they've got dollar signs in their eyes, they've got pressure from their boards and shareholders to deliver that amazing multiple exit. And you look at the kind of better for you category on average over a long period of time, you can deliver, it's not tech type multiples, you can deliver 3 or 4 times net sales in terms
Yeah.
of the multiple in a good market with the wind behind you and the right competitive. And that generates shareholder returns. And maybe there's a degree of rationalization that goes on in the founder and the board's minds that have been mission driven for 10 years. And now they see the dollar signs and it's like, oh yeah, this acquiring company is saying the right things. I trust, and maybe I'll help make that company better. But in
Yeah.
many cases, that's a bit of rationalization, and you look back, and it's kind of gone away a little bit.
Well, I think with some of them too, they look at the numbers, not thinking that the retention rate of that specific type of buyer who's buying for a certain thing is they're very, very fickle.
Yeah,
Most people I know, as soon as you make that transition and you start making those changes, they'll be gone. And so I'm
yeah,
sure a lot of
yeah,
acquisitions haven't worked out for that
yeah.
reason too. Yeah.
There's an example, I think, actually in the UK of some friends kind of in the same era as Method was being developed, built an amazing fresh juice brand called Innocent Drinks. And it was a mission driven brand. And then it was acquired by Coca-Cola. And there was a lot of consumer commentary you're selling out to the devil. I do think that there were some, consumers that were lost along the way. And I know the Innocent team put a lot of thought and commitment into the transition and a lot of protective clauses. I think the most famous example is Ben and Jerry's
Yeah.
acquisition by Unilever, where the founders put in the M&A documents all the protection that Ben and Jerry's will have a separate board, will have complete autonomy on its values. And look, of all big CPGs, I think Unilever is one of the less bad. I think they've done some pretty good things around sustainability and have used their might to move the needle. But if you track some of the recent kind of controversy over that, there's a clear gap still between the Ben and Jerry's kind of board position and that of Unilever. So much so that the ice cream business at Unilever is just being spun off as we speak right now.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a case where maybe the acquiree didn't quite take, and they solved the problem by spinning off the
Yeah.
entire ice cream division globally.
Well, I am, that's my guilty pleasures, ice cream. My favorite ice cream of all time is Ben and Jerry's. And for me, I just love the taste. So I'm not fickle when it comes to mission, as long as the ingredients are good, it tastes delicious. But that is a really hilarious example. And you would imagine that based on the founders, that's the kind of thing that they would do and build into it. They're so value driven as a
Exactly.
company. Well, it's interesting because this is definitely, it seems like it's a theme that you are either starting companies or taking over running companies that specifically are purpose driven. Like that's something that must stem from a core belief that you have as an individual. Because a lot of people, they'll do a stint at one company that's not necessarily that way. They'll do, it's more about the business opportunity, the growth opportunity. But it seems like you specifically throughout your life have looked to that for there's something inside you that's looking to run these types of companies specifically.
I think it was inspiration. I'm not sure I was born with it. I don't think it's necessarily innate, but there's some occasions where you meet people that really sort of transform the way you think. And there were a couple of examples, I'd say. One was when I met this incredible sustainability thought leader, Bill McDonough. Bill and his thought partner, Michael Broomgart, wrote a book called Cradle to Cradle that just is kind of the seminal work in sustainability. It basically says, it teaches about the circular economy. And it basically says, if you can construct your brand, your business or service, whereby the output of consumption can be taken as an ingredient for future production, and you're able to close the loop, then you can kind of have infinite growth while still managing your kind of presence, your environmental footprint. And for me, that was a big moment, right? I think I mentioned I was Scottish, and I'm biased, but I happen to think it's the most beautiful country in the world. And so I innately had a love of nature and a love of protecting beautiful things in nature. But growing up, as I looked around in the 80s, a lot of the environmentalists were militant, right? They were really anti-growth, anti-business, and that didn't really sit with me. I said, okay, I love what you're protecting, but you need to have, I was fundamentally believed in capitalism as a way to generate wealth and to generate opportunities for people and to create opportunities for growth for everybody. And so this idea of being anti-business didn't really get reconciled for me until reading this book, Cradle to Cradle. And that's just fundamentally been part of how I think about any business. It's around sustainability, and I think that's one of the most important. Around the same time that you and I met was also the beginning of the foundation by some remarkable individuals who created the B Lab movement, which Method was a founding B Lab. And I think it was Bart and Jay who came into our offices, and they had this premise that, look, again, that business should be an agent for change for the good.
Mhm.
They talk about the stakeholder community, and now B Lab is this global phenomenon that increasingly consumers are seeking out in their purchase choices, right? So I think something like 40 to 50% of kind of our kids' generation, those in our kind of younger adulthood, are aware of B Corp. look for certified organizations, and will actively choose these brands that are B certified, as part of their consumption. So I think what's really cool is that this becomes a measurable standard on a global basis for having a stakeholder point of view. And they measure against community scores, environmental scores, employee welfare scores, and it's just a fundamentally great way to have a way to track your progress as a business leader, and to have a standard that's sort of transparent and works across the world. And you've got tiny companies, and you've got larger companies. Patagonia is a great example.
Mhm.
Canon is another example. I think there's some Gap divisions like Athleta. So there's public companies that have said this is for us. It's not just all the Davids. There's some global leaders that have signed up. And so I think for me, meeting the B Lab founders was a really important moment for me as I kind of thought about how do you scale and how do you create a movement of mission driven businesses. And so these are the two moments for me where I realized, okay, you can codify and create a repeatable model here and create a community for change. And it's really cool to see that becoming accelerating and to becoming a leading purchase criteria for our kids'
Yeah.
generation.
Well, I know that when something matters to you, particularly about around your health, let's say as a typical example, health and safety, you've got a brand that you love, you tend to want to look for that in almost everything, right? It's not like, hey, I like this one brand because of all these purpose-driven, mission-driven things that we just talked about, but only in that area. Everywhere else, I'm
Right.
terrible. You tend to be conscious of these things, and you tend to want to always look for brands that fall within that kind of value
Yeah.
set. And so I
Yeah.
like this idea of this standardization, become where people can see that and identify that. And maybe that leads them to do a little more research on a specific brand as well. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a joke that method that cleaning was like the entry level drug for sustainability, right? And if you can make a small change in your purpose and the brands you buy in your household chores, and you can figure out you can actually do so without a trade off, then it does flow into other areas of your life. And you can say, okay, if I made that change in cleaning, then it can apply in all areas. I think the challenge, and this is something that I was really excited while I was leading Drops, is that historically there's been a terrible trade-off, right, between mission-driven brands. An unfortunate trade-off. Like in food, it'd be that an organic food product would either be healthy for you, but kind of the bruised fruit or the bad-looking apple,
Right.
or it's twice the price.
Yeah.
So, and in cleaning, and in particularly in the categories like laundry and dish, there had historically been this, well, green products don't clean, green doesn't clean. And that's a non-starter, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I was really excited about Drops is we were able to, because there's been such an acceleration in green chemistry and the technology that occurs in surfactants, bio-based enzymes. Now you can actually, at Drops, we're able to deliver for the first time laundry and dish products that were largely bio-based, have a great health profile, and deliver the same efficacy as you'd expect from a Tide
Yeah.
or a Cascade. And that was a
Right.
critical moment. I think if a better for you brand comes at you with a trade-off, then it remains a bit of a niche opportunity for kind of a dark green or a
Yeah.
household that can afford to pay twice as much. But the breakthrough comes in consumer categories where you eliminate that trade-off, and it become, buying something that's better for you or better for the planet is a free prize inside when there's no trade-off and it's the same
Yeah.
affordability. And that's when you see consumption go, all the way towards 100% in the category. And that's the exciting point.
Yeah. I've always felt that most people I know, at least I can only speak from my own frame of reference, they want to do the thing that's better, socially if the price is the same or a slight premium.
Right.
They just can't pay an enormous amount because of the
Yeah.
economics come in. But
Yeah.
most people want to do the good thing. The other thing, I don't know if you've seen this at all, Alistair, but I think about like my own family. We talked about we each have 4 kids, and you're always teaching your children, whether it's cooking or whatever. And I know that when you do buy these specific consumer brands that are this purpose driven, you tend to explain to your children why you're doing it. And I've taught them whatever it is, the reasons why we use this and these types of products and why these things are dangerous. And so I feel like this category has provided an educational tool that's passed down maybe to the younger generation. So in addition to what they're blissed with every day on social media, wherever they're getting their content from, their parents who are buying these products don't just buy them and take them for granted. They tend to explain why. At least that's what happens in my own family. And then the kids start thinking about it, right? Because they're like, "Oh, my dad told me this is better for me safety, for my safety. This is not toxic. This is not going to be sitting, for 1,000 years, in a trash bin that can't be disposed because it's heavy plastic." All these different things that are good things are taught through the parents downward. When you have a frame of reference, you have to have the thing to talk about, and I find that's definitely an issue.
Yeah. And Tim, certainly it's privileged to teach the next generation. I actually find it goes the other way. And that's the
Yeah.
awesome thing
Oh, yeah.
where, I've got my younger two, Lucy and Mac, are all about healthy diet and, protein and getting their lifts in. And I'm constantly getting schooled on my macros and dad label watch and making sure that, the daily regimen is good. So I think once you establish that curiosity at a young age, it starts developing a life of its own. And I absolutely find that. And, my other daughter, Elizabeth's constantly schooling me on, what's in my ingredient list. And that's awesome when the next generation's teaching you, and then you feel like, okay, maybe I've done something right. And then feel optimistic that our kids' generation is actually smarter, have better access to information, better informed on health education from the likes of Huberman, and so that's what shifts ultimately. These go back to the legacy companies. They got to change, right?
Yeah.
Because the next generation is better informed and more demanding, more exacting, and has access to instant information that can flip consumer behavior. It shows up on TikTok, and all of a sudden, you can lose 10% market share if you don't have the right attributes.
Yeah,
Um,
that's incredible. Yeah, yeah. Well, let's take one step backwards because I just want to touch upon method for my own selfish reasons. There was this period of time, having been here in San Francisco, where it just seemed like out of the blue, at one discrete moment, and maybe that discrete moment was 6 months or something. Everybody I knew was talking about this company called Method and their products, like, my wife and all her friends, and they were this idea of, we got these basic consumer products that you would think were boring, and they're in a really cool packaging, and they're really cool colors, and they can almost be used like an accessory, almost like furniture, like, you don't have to stick them underneath the cabinet with the other cleaning solutions. You can put them up, pick the right color that's gonna match. It looks cool, people talk about it, and then they would always talk about how healthy they were for you in terms of being toxin free, safe. And it just seemed to explode out of the blue, particularly in San Francisco. So what was that process like? I mean, to me, I know that wasn't the start of this conscious consumerism, but for me, I remember that discrete moment of time is where I started thinking about cleaning products and all these other things that we were ingesting either through the dishes and or on the laundry that we're putting on our bodies.
well, you're very kind at describing that moment. There was many years when it was distinctly uncool.
Okay.
Going to a cocktail party or sitting next to somebody on a plane, you describe what you're doing. Yeah, I run a company called Method. We make cleaning products. It was like the fastest way to have a conversation end, right? But yeah, we did see the all of a sudden the momentum and the awareness suddenly go through some inflection points. And I have to credit my two founders. I was the founding CEO, and Eric and Adam were the founders of that business.
Right.
And, we go back to my comment about founders having an instinct of something they're passionate about. And each of these two guys kind of personified the two attributes that you described, right? One was design, that was all about Eric, and the other was about sustainability and better for you, that was Adam. And the whole conversation was based on two fundamental cultural insights. And I think if you're building a consumer brand and you can find a cultural disconnect, something where how the consumer is being currently served is completely at odds with where the culture is going, you have an opportunity to do something and tell a story that is magical and game changing. And
Yeah.
so Eric's insight was, okay, the design of your home at a time when America was becoming a lot more design savvy, design centric. The design in your home is a reflection of your personal taste, second only to your apparel and how you show up. And so it's very, very important for people's identity and sense of pride in their home. And yet the products used to maintain the home, you're right, were so ugly, you'd hide them under your sink. And so Eric's moment of insight was to recognize, okay, if we could reconcile that tension and create elegant products that are counter-worthy, something you would not be ashamed of leaving on the counter, then that suddenly was one of the two levers that sort of transformed in the brand DNA the opportunity for growth. And Adam's insight was more around, was a Stanford chemical engineer and environmental studies guy. And his insight was, okay, so you're cleaning your home to keep your home healthy, and yet the products you're cleaning them with are registered pesticides by the EPA. So what if
That's the
we take
cultural
these,
disconnect right
right?
there. Yeah.
We take these, you know, counter-worthy products. Well, we better make sure that we're using ingredients that are really well curated and safer and kind of cradle to cradle in their ethos. So we worked super hard to ensure that every single ingredient we're using went through this really extensive safety screen for human and planetary health. So I think the answer is that if you can identify these cultural disconnects and see where the puck is going, that's really the foundation. That was the process by which the brand was created around this style and substance. And it
Yeah.
really took a moment of inflection point when that was, particularly the San Francisco consumer that kind of was a little more progressive on design and sustainability issues that kind of caught fire. It also helped, right, that from a PR and earned media point of view, when the category is so boring and you have something a little bit more remarkable, it's super newsworthy. And we were kind of almost like the poster child of every photo editor of magazines. And so it became highly captured and a lot of storytelling from earned media. And then I think the other piece of the pie that was essential was the relationship with Target, right? In that retail partnership really put the brand on the map, and they gave remarkable visibility on end caps at the end of the aisle and a lot of support for the brand in the early days. And to the extent that Method was featured in Target's annual report in the early days of Method. For those of you who are running consumer brands, you have a good thing when your brand is featured in a retailer's annual report. That's a sign of alignment. So I think these are the elements that, and a lot of it was luck, but the more you put into it, the more luck you get, right? And we worked very hard for these elements to come together, and it was one of these
Yeah.
moments of alignment. And the result was, it was a talked about brand, and it was fun that in 2006, I think the fastest growing privately held company in California was a soap company, not a Silicon Valley company. So that was a cool moment.
That's hilarious. So I always look at brands as a way of sharing what you believe in, sharing your values, whether it's the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the wine you drink, whatever it is. It's a reflection of what you believe in and what you support. And what's so interesting about this is, supporting cleaning products. There was never an instance in which you could do that even if you wanted to. And the other side to this is not only were people putting these cool kind of designed hand washing lotions or all the different things in their homes, they started talking about it when people came over as almost like it wasn't just promoting the product, but it was a way of having a conversation about sharing something that you believed in. People were talking about the brand, not as just a cool thing, but as a way of them sharing with other people. I believe in this idea of health and not hurting animals and doing something that's good for your family. It's just a way of promoting kind of this purpose driven,
Yeah,
industry.
I would say that pretty much every real estate agent, when they were staging a home, would put method on the kitchen and bathroom sink. It was like an icon of, it was the stager's delight. It was an easy way to zhuzh
Was that
up.
a growth niche, a distribution niche? You guys discovered the real estate.
Inadvertently, yeah, we became the realtor and architect and photo editor's kind of go-to brand.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it would be false to say that was as an act of genius. It was really by lucky happenstance, but it certainly became the watchword that if you were a discerning person, you'd have method on your countertop. Maybe a little bit of virtue signaling as well, but
Sure.
we're very proud that, if you double clicked on what the brand stood for, there was some substance there. But I would say that the phasing of the two over time was, we had to pace the narrative out, because we kind of raised, okay, cleaning is all about, does it work? It's about the efficacy of the product. And we had
Sure.
these pretty bottles. So we already had kind of one strike against us from a credibility point of view. So
Right.
we had to kind of say, yeah, we've pretty bottles, nice fragrances, and then people would use the product and say, you know what, it actually works pretty well too. And then in time, we introduced the sustainability message, as it was almost, the design was almost the Trojan horse for our sustainability measure, the story. So the phasing of Eric and Adam's passion and narrative had to be paced over a few beats of the consumer narrative.
Well, it was an amazing story. It was a great product, and I loved it. And one of those things where I personally, in my area where I lived, I got to experience all of that and feel that momentum. It was pretty cool. And I know this has been a theme moving on. We talked a little bit earlier about drops and the turnaround there, and a lot of the same features you brought into drops to really build that company up. And then you just mentioned earlier that you've made that turnaround successfully, and you're going to be transitioning and looking for something new. So I'm imagining you're in search of that next big purpose driven company to change the world. So, where do things stand for you today, Alistair?
I'm about 9 days in, Tim, and I've got a really big honeydew list of stuff. I got the outdoor lights working for the first time, and I've got
Oh
four
my
kids
gosh.
coming back for the holidays. So I have to say I'm pretty early, but what I will say is that, look, I love working with founders or founder driven brands that are mission driven. I've spent a lot of time in food, personal care, and the household, and I actually think there's a clear thought process around what you put in your body is typically a few years ahead of what you put on your body, which is then a few years ahead of what you put around your home. So typically I'll be working in one of these categories, and there's a lot of great innovation occurring. I'm excited to be chatting with quite a few founders who've come forward saying, "Hey, Alistair, can you help me do this?" And with time and experience, I think one of the things is pattern recognition. I've made a lot more mistakes in my business career than I have made great decisions, and so I think with the experience of skinning my knees and the scar tissue, is that what I like to do is try to help a founder anticipate what's next. Because on that journey from 0 to 100, if you're doing it for the first time, then you just don't really, the ability to anticipate what's going to be needed in your organization or your brand in a year's time is just by definition impossible for you to
Yeah.
foretell. And what I love to be able to do is to sort of help anticipate, okay, this is going great, but let's fast forward a couple of chapters in the book. Let's really look for areas of weakness or opportunity for you to shore up and really help. And often working with the board and investors to say, look, while the brand is doing great now, this challenge is going to come, right? And we're going to need to tool up for that phase. So a lot of what I like to do is kind of future proof
Mhm.
some of the growth story and just shore up it's just de-risking the growth stage
Yeah.
of a business.
I think another kind of valuable tool that you would have from all your experiences, particularly for entrepreneurs that are going through this kind of inflection point, this cultural disconnect, is how you select investors. Because if you are a purpose driven company and the investors can literally make or break the company, slow it down, boot you out, whatever the situation is, having the wisdom, which wisdom is usually obtained through, like you said, battle scars,
Yeah.
having the wisdom or someone like yourself to talk to about what type of money I should bring into this organization and when would be something very valuable.
Yeah, and I think to me, I evaluate investors and board members on their genuine value added.
Mhm.
Like recently, some of the drops investors had like 2 decades in our category of cleaning, and so they really knew what they're talking about. And so it was, I actually gained a lot of learning from that sort of investor profile. And then the other axis is the degree they want to be involved in the conversation. And
Yeah.
to me, the sweet spot is like if you've got value added in the category or channels, but you recognize that from a governance point of view, you want to insert that governance in the appropriate cadence. That doesn't mean that the team is constantly preparing for board meetings as opposed to running the business. I think there's a degree of involvement that is appropriate, whether it's maybe 4 to 6 board meetings a year and getting really involved in these moments and being available for the founder and high impact. That's to me the ideal investor. There's other investors I've had who have been, high net worth. They profess to know nothing about the business, love the idea, and just don't really want to be involved other than just give me the annual update. And that's great too. It's a different type of governance.
Yeah.
But I've also had board members where they have very little category experience, but want to insert themselves every week in the conversation. And you find yourself constantly having to explain the fundamentals of your business to them. And that can be a little distracting and not a great use of time. So I like to discern value added and the cadence and degree of involvement that an investor or board member will have, and hopefully get the right place on the map and set expectations of what that engagement would be, and have the ability to set a boundary in a respectful way, because very often you can find yourself just responding to question after question, and that double click never ends.
Well, I mean, that is some true wisdom gained through, like I said, the battles of the past. And I would think any entrepreneur that hasn't gone through that first would it'd be really a gift to be able to talk to someone like yourself and explore those kind of pitfalls that are, you said, inevitably going to hit a lot of people. And so I'm excited that you are available to share that wisdom, because a lot of times when you're running a company, as you have been for so many decades, you don't have the time to really support those types of folks. And I think that can be the difference between making it and breaking it in your business. So if people want to reach you, if they have found that massive cultural disconnect, or they're trying to scale their company, they're raising capital, they're worried about, what are the potential dangers and red flags in front of me, where can they reach you for some
Well,
great advice?
you can ping my LinkedIn profile,
Okay.
or I'll even give my email right here, which is alastairmdorward@gmail.com.
Well, I will make
M,
sure I
my
put
middle initial. Yeah.
I'll make sure I put those in the show notes as well, so you can just point and click.
Right
So,
on.
well, thanks so much. It's been cool going back a little bit to the old days to talk about method and find out what really happened from the inside, see what's going on today in your life, and to be part of this idea of, if you're going to make products and you're going to make things that people are going to consume in some way that can affect their health, that you can make great products that are hip and cool, and do that with a sense of cultural sensitivity that maybe companies in the past hadn't. And so I appreciate you for doing all that great work.
It takes a team, Tim, and I really appreciate the time to be on with you and to connect again with you.
Thanks. It was really awesome. Appreciate it, Alistair. Cheers.
Take care.
The Startup Innovators podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.